So my name is John Brugan. I'm the director at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm here in St. Augustine, Florida. And we're just talking about the different problems that we have associated with our keeping reptiles in captivity. And one of the questions you asked me was, what do we do with confiscated alligators? And the truth is, in Florida, we don't really have many confiscated alligators. The alligator population is protected. You're not allowed to have an alligator as a pet unless you have a very specific permit with the state of Florida, and so that permit requires you to prove that you have at least 1,000 hours of experience with alligators. It also requires you to have a minimum of 5 acres of property and this appropriate size enclosure with the appropriate height fences and all of that kind of thing. So accepting an alligator permit and having an alligator as a pet is kind of a rare thing in Florida. And so we don't have many cases where alligators are turned over as a rescue animal. We do have, of course, native alligators that live here. And so there are plenty of instances where we have what the state would call nuisance alligators. And those are alligators that have shown up in somebody's yard or end up in their swimming pool. And honestly, those alligators are usually terminated. And that leads to a conversation about conservation. Conservation is not a cuddly thing about protecting a single individual animal. It is a broad spectrum thing about protecting a population. And so if the best thing for the population is for certain animals to be removed, that has to be done. And that's a decision that Florida has made with their alligator population. So if an alligator shows up and it's threatening a schoolyard or it's threatening somebody's pet, it doesn't just get moved, because then it becomes someone else's problem, or it relocates itself back to the original problem. It gets euthanized, and that is hard for that individual animal. That's kind of hard for us to think about for individuals if we got a cuddly feely mentality about conservation. But it's the right thing for the whole population.
And how do you feel about people that in the urban environment, cities and so forth, that actually own alligators, or crocodilians in general, that get over 3 feet?
Sure. So honestly, crocodilians are not good pets. They get too large, and while they're adorable when they're little, and you think I'm going to keep it for a while and donate it to the local zoo, let me tell you, the local zoo doesn't want it and can't take it in that population, because what you have in your situation is going to be a fairly common species like American alligator or some of the caiman species. And to be honest, if the zoos take those species when they get too big for you, then we don't have space to work with the endangered species like the Chinese alligator, or there's eight of the critically endangered animals, big ones like Orinoco crocodiles. And so we can't continue to take on your unwanted pets in that process. So the answer is, you got to say no to those things. You've got to say, if I don't have 5 acres of property and I'm not going to take care of this thing as long as it's going to live, then you can't do it. You can't keep it in your tub, and I hope your mom doesn't recognize it for what it is for 3 years and then try to find a home for it. It's not responsible pet keeping at all.
So in Florida, how do you feel about the permitting?
The permitting in Florida, it can be frustrating, but I think it's necessary. So I think the permitting in Florida is on point for what needs to happen, because it's not easy to prove that you have 1,000 hours of experience with an alligator if you can't legally own an alligator. So you have to go out of your way to find somebody that will give you that experience and to intern or work with them volunteer hours. And if you're willing to prove that you're that invested at that point, then maybe you deserve the permit. But people who can just walk into a pet store and buy an alligator for $150 and bring it home are really the root of the problem. You don't have anywhere to put those animals in 3 years.
Now, what would you say is the reason there are so many alligators? Would you attribute that to the conservation efforts when they were going extinct?
Yeah, so alligators are a wonderful example of humans getting involved in conservation and really doing something right. They're kind of one of those things we point to and say, okay, if we did anything right in conservation, it was alligators. So in 30, 40 years ago, alligators were endangered. They were being hunted unregulated. Their skins are valuable. They make really nice leather handbags. That's a problem, and we placed alligators on the endangered species list. But alligators on the endangered species list was nice. It seemed like it was the right move, but it didn't actually fit. It didn't actually fix the problem. The problem was still continuing. It was just continuing illegally because we made it illegal to kill an alligator. But if you didn't get caught actually killing the alligator, the skin trade was still legal and still viable. And so it wasn't until real alligator farms came online and started breeding alligators themselves and were allowed to sell the skins that the skin trade, the prices fell out so much that it wasn't worth risking going to jail over illegally killing alligators. And so these farms and some zoos and these areas that were allowed by the government have allowed production of alligators, which allowed things to be left alone in the wild. And it doesn't take much for a crocodilian species to bounce back. You can basically leave them alone, and in 2 or 3 generations you'll see huge improvements in the population. I mean, the things lay 40 or 50 eggs at a time, so if no one's out there killing them, their population can be strong again.